Making the gemstone project is fairly straightforward. Please make sure you are paying attention to the specific requirements for your grade levels gemstone assignment. Different grade levels have different requirements. For example, 5th grade is required to show they understand warm and cool colors by using either only warm or only cool. 6th and 8th grade are required to show color and value transitions by blending or changing the pressure with their chosen media or art material. For the sake of argument, let's say you have a ruler with measurements. You can use the measurements or not. You just need to be able to make a straight edge. I'm holding my ruler parallel to the top edge of my paper. My paper is 9 inches long-ish, so I'm going to leave about 2 inches worth of space on either side, which means in my case I'm going to draw from the number 2 to the number 7 with my ruler. I'm going to scooch my ruler down about another ruler's width worth of space away. And now I'm going to leave an inch worth of space on either side. So I'm going to draw from the 1 to the 8. If you do not have a ruler or way of measuring, you can just eyeball these distances. We're going to connect the ends of our lines by pivoting our ruler. So I'm going to pivot from my pencil to the end of my line on both sides. This will create a trapezoid. I can either eyeball where the middle of my paper is or with my ruler. If I know that my bottom line is 7 inches long, half of 7 is 3.5. Your measurements may be different, so I can put a little notch at 3.5. Place your ruler vertically or straight up and down, perpendicular to the lines you just created, and make a little dot at the nearest whole number. So 9 is off the paper, which means I'm going to make a little dot at 8. It doesn't actually matter what the number is because it's the nearest whole number, no matter where my ruler is. Pivot from the ends of your trapezoid. Line your ruler up with the end of your trapezoid and the dot. Draw your line. Repeat. End of the trapezoid, physically pivoting my ruler and drawing my line. With measurements on my bottom line, I'm going to disregard that dot that I created to find the center, so I can actually erase it to avoid any future confusion. I am going to put a mark in the case of my measurements. I'm going to put a mark at 2 and 5 because that gives me 2 inches from each corner. On the top, I'm going to make a mark at 2.5 because that is the midpoint. If you have a larger shape, you will be able to create more points. So you should have more points on the bottom line of your trapezoid than the top. I'm going to connect from my top left corner to my first dot by pivoting and using my ruler. Connect the dots from dot to dot by pivoting your ruler. Use those ruler skills. Dot to dot. And dot to corner. You may have more zigzags than I do and therefore more triangles at the top. You should not have fewer triangles at the top. We're going to divide the bottom part of our gemstone into multiple different shapes or facets by connecting the bottoms of our triangles, or the peaks of our triangles that are pointing down, to the bottom of the big triangle. So pivoting from your triangle to the end, and pivoting from your triangle to the end. Physically pivoting against my pencil. If you're an 8th grade student, you can use graphite or colored pencils or crayons. I don't recommend using markers. If I'm using graphite, I'm going to shade in each individual facet or shape lightly. Don't cheat and go across all of them. It doesn't look quite as good as if you take your time. You're using either the skills from the graphite boot camp or the skills from the color blending and color theory boot camp. So I would smudge my graphite. And I'm going to pick a corner, any corner. All of these facets are triangles. I'm going to gradually apply more pressure to a corner, and then I'm going to taper off my pressure so my graphite starts out fairly dark and then becomes lighter and blends into or gradually transitions to that base graphite value. As I'm shading, trying to keep it as smooth as I can, and then I'm going to smudge the graphite with my fingertip. If I have graphite halos, which are little graphite smudges outside of your shape, erase them, even if you're going to use graphite in all of your shapes. So I've erased a little too much graphite there. I'm going to go ahead and fix that. If you would like to use color, you can use a color, any color, for example, except for white. And I don't recommend that you use yellow because it's very light. It doesn't photograph well. So if I'm using red, for example, I can shade in my facet with just red, and I can change how much pressure I'm using with the colored pencil to create different value. So I'm going to lightly and skillfully fill in my shape or facet with my base red value. Pick a corner, any corner, and I'm going to start using more pressure, practicing good craftsmanship and care, and I'm going to push down a little bit more to make my value darker. Gradually let up my value by tapering off my pressure and really blending those values together as I reach the middle of my triangle. So I have a value transition with color by changing my pressure. I have value transition with graphite by changing my pressure and blending with my fingertip. You can also have a value transition through the use of color. When you transition from one color to another, you will by default be able to have a value transition. So if I'm going to transition from sky blue to regular blue, for example, same process applies. So I'm going to fill in my shape or facet carefully. I'm going to practice good craftsmanship, staying in my lines 90% of the time. You can do that. Nice and even, nice and smooth, very few white marks. I am working on another piece of paper, actually several pieces of paper, to avoid any kind of scratch marks showing through from my paper underneath. So if I have my blue, I can now overlap it with my darker blue, any corner. So I'm using more pressure so that it deposits the pigment on top of the color. I'm going to gradually taper off my pressure so that it blends and I'm physically overlapping the color. You could have chosen to not completely fill the triangle in with that sky blue at first, very similar to the triangle activity in the color blending and color blending and color theory boot camp activity. So now we go from dark to medium to light. Fill in every facet. You may choose to outline your pencil marks with a black marker or a colored pencil when you're done, but that is not a requirement.